Please welcome to the stage John and Adrienne Mars, Director of the National Air and Space Museum, General Jack Daly. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Ivanka Trump. Museum Explainer, Ray Stewart. NASA Astronaut Kay Hire. And NASA Engineers and Modern Figures, April Erickson, Sandra Kaufman, and Andrea Razaghi.
I think we can all be seated. Well, good morning. I'm Jack Daly, the John and Adrienne Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to celebrate Women's History Month and can hear from some of our special guests on how you can make yourself famous. Every March across the country, we commemorate the accomplishments of significant women of every era. Some, like Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman, and Jackie Cochran, found their way into history books by being the first or the fastest. Others make history by overcoming extraordinary obstacles to accomplish exceptional tasks. Last year, Hollywood did a story on 3 such women in the film Hidden Figures, which you'll see later today. It reminds us that it was the contribution and hard work of thousands of Americans of all ages, genders, and races that resulted in the triumph of putting the first human on the moon. But I also want to take a moment today to discuss a group of people who haven't made it into the history books yet. I challenge you to think about what great milestones you'd like to reach in the next 60 years and how you can make them happen. And as the 3 women in the film discovered, it may take more than brains. It may take courage and determination to overcome others' preconceptions of what you can accomplish. No matter what, making history takes hard work, and that starts in the classroom. In Hidden Figures, the term computer didn't mean the phone in your pocket. It meant a person that did the critical task of computing orbital trajectories with lives on the line. Science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM subjects, are vital, even in the age of smartphones. Our special guest today can tell you firsthand just how far you can go if you start early and study hard. I'd like to thank Ivanka Trump and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos for being here today. Our museum and the Department of Education can change the way schools and museums work together and ensure that a century from now, these halls will be filled with new stories of achievements that we can't yet fathom. We look forward to hearing from Secretary DeVos in a few moments. The National Air and Space Museum works to create innovative models for informal education and to build bridges to the nation's formal education system. One of our most successful initiatives has been a partnership with General Electric Aviation that brings special museum programs directly into the classrooms of the Cincinnati public school system. These lessons are led by extraordinary young people called explainers, and one of them is here to talk to you right now. It's my pleasure to introduce Ray Stewart. Ray?
Thank you, General Daly. Good morning, everyone, and once again, welcome to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. The artifacts here at this museum have remarkable stories to tell, and the biggest aren't necessarily the best. Some things that seem small and unremarkable may have in fact changed human history. It's impossible to know all of the stories behind these artifacts, just as it is impossible to know all of the stories behind everyone who had a hand in making them. But that's the beautiful thing about science and innovation. Every achievement, big or small, is not the result of just one person's work, but is based off of the work of generations of people over centuries and millennia. It is impossible to know the names of all of the people who work to advance our knowledge of the universe, but some people do not have to remain hidden from view. This morning we will see Hidden Figures, a powerful movie about a powerful story. Katherine Johnson and her fellow human computers opened so many doors. They charted the course to take us to space, and all the progress we have since then stands on their shoulders. As a young Black woman in science, I too stand on their shoulders. They have opened the door for me to participate in this great adventure. These women worked so hard, not because of how easy it was, but in spite of the challenges and because it was worth it. I am currently in Washington, D.C. to study physics, and thankfully have the opportunity to be an explainer here at the museum. The explainers tell the stories behind these artifacts to students just like you. Every day, we work to plant seeds of curiosity to further future innovation and discovery. But the rest is up to you. There will be voices that say that you can't. And some of those voices will come from you, back in the back of your mind saying, I'm not smart enough, or I don't belong. But don't listen. You do belong. You will have to work hard, and you will have to fight for it. But it is worth fighting for. And do not be discouraged, because you too are standing on the shoulders of many who came before you, who have worked hard and have fought to do their part. We know that this is worth fighting for. It is worth fighting for. And it's worth fighting for not because of just for yourself or for current humanity, for our current development, but it's worth fighting for the future generations as well. We believe in you, and we know that you can do it. It is my pleasure to introduce an advocate for education and empowerment of women, Ms. Ivanka Trump.
Thank you, Ray. How incredible is she? Amazing. Your words inspire us all. Thank you. I'm honored to be here today at one of my very, very favorite museums, the National Air and Space Museum. This month, Women's History Month, we recognize the essential role of women and girls in our society and in our economy. Today, this wonderful event encourages us to think specifically about the role of women, girls, and boys in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, as we reflect on the past, the present, and the future. The film we're about to see, titled Hidden Figures, honors the legacy of 3 female African-American NASA scientists who helped launch the first astronauts into orbit in NASA's early history. The heroes of Hidden Figures were trailblazers for women in STEM, paving the way for greater representation of women and African Americans in these fields. They embody America's spirit of innovation and inspire us all to continue pushing gender boundaries across all industries. Thanks to their enormous contribution, today, more than 50 years later, my father's administration has expanded NASA's space exploration mission and added Mars as a key objective. I can only imagine where we're going to be in another 50 years from now, and rather where your generation of scientists, mathematicians, engineers, and astronauts will take us. Okay, so raise your hand if you're passionate about STEM. Let's see. Very good. Raise your hand if you'd like to be one of America's greatest innovators. I'm impressed. Your response fills me with incredible hope. Today's statistics, though, not so much. Women make up 48% of the US workforce, but only 24% of STEM professionals. This statistic shows that we are sadly moving in the wrong direction. Women are increasingly underrepresented in important fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. But I dare you to beat these statistics and advance the role of women in STEM fields. Women's participation in STEM, where so many of the jobs of the future will come from, is critical in the fight for wage equality and for the empowerment of women in the economy. To the young men in this audience, you also have a major responsibility to continue the work of the great men and women in STEM who came before you. I'm also going to give you a call to action. I'm going to urge you to empower your female classmates and support them along the way. The playing field will only be leveled if we can all work together to eliminate these long-standing barriers. On a very personal level, as a mom, I'm trying to do my part as well. My daughter, Arabella, and I are enrolling in a coding class this summer. We're excited to learn this incredibly important new language together. Coding truly is the language of the future. Now I challenge you to embrace STEM learning and become part of our country's great history of scientists and mathematicians and support each other in reaching this tremendous goal. Innovation is at the heart of the American genome. American innovations have transformed our world. From the light bulb to the smartphone, America leads by example. And you can continue to move the needle in favor of greater innovation. You are the next generation of innovators. You are the future, and the future is in your very capable hands. It is now my tremendous honor and pleasure to introduce to you someone who is a great champion for each and every one of you, and who's the mastermind behind this inspiring event celebrating the work you are doing in your schools and in STEM fields. Secretary Betsy DeVos.
Thank you so much, Ivanka, for that very kind introduction and for your great remarks. And thank you to General Daly for hosting us here at the museum today. Thank you to the engineers and our astronaut for being here today. We're excited to hear from you in a few moments. I want to begin, though, by asking all of the students in the audience, how many of you have dreamt of being an astronaut? Can I see a show of hands? Quite a few. How many of you would like to go into outer space someday? Lots more hands. Well, you're going to need the ones that first raise their hands to get on that first. Today, you're going to learn about some of the people who first made it possible for people to go to space. I'm going to date myself and say I'm probably one of the few in this room that actually remembers when a human first stepped foot on the moon. I don't know how many of you students have seen video film or film footage of that event. Can I see a show of hands for that event again? That was an amazing moment. I think I was 10 years old at the time, and I'll never forget the feeling of pride that I had by seeing our American astronauts set foot on the moon. You here represent the future for this nation. And Ivanka talked about the fact that her father has set out the goal and the aspiration of reaching Mars with humans. And I know that there's probably someone in this audience who's going to be part of that important mission. I'm excited about the movie that you're about to see. I've had the opportunity to see it. It is a really inspiring movie. And the women in the movie, in this movie, Hidden Figures, showed that it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl, whether you're black or white, you can be great at whatever you do, so long as you believe in yourself, you work hard, and you stay true to your convictions. In a minute, we're going to meet an accomplished astronaut. But I want to mention another trailblazer that I recently met. Her name is Shasta Wise. Shasta and her family fled Afghanistan when she was a young girl. She didn't fly on a plane until she was in high school. But from the moment she took off on her first flight, she knew she wanted to be a pilot. She was committed to her dream, and she worked hard to achieve it. She became the first civilian female pilot from Afghanistan. And now she's founded her own nonprofit called Dreams Soar, with a mission of inspiring the next generation of STEM and aviation professionals. She's about to begin a flight around the world to encourage women to get involved in STEM and aviation. She's stopping in 28 countries on 5 continents. She's just one of many trailblazing young women who are promoting the importance of STEM education and the field of aviation. Now, there are still barriers to overcome, just like there were for all of the women that you're meeting today. They paved the way for your success, but you can do your part to improve the lives of women in the future. I mentor a teenage girl in my hometown, and that's been a very, very informative a relationship for me, a very important relationship. I want to encourage the young girls in this room and the young boys to think about mentoring in your lives. Who here has a younger sister or a younger brother or a younger cousin? I hope that you never underestimate the impact that you can have on their lives by being a good example and by encouraging them to be the best they can be at whatever they choose to do. We are very fortunate to have someone here today who personifies a trailblazing woman in STEM and aviation, Astronaut Kay Hire. Kay was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama, and she graduated from the United States Naval Academy. In 1993, she became the first female in the U.S. military assigned to a combat crew. She started astronaut training in 1995. She has orbited the Earth over 400 times and has logged over 711 hours in space. She also helped build the International Space Station. She is quite a trailblazer, and I am proud to introduce you to Captain Kay Hire.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. It's really a treat for me to be here today. Hopefully you're feeling the same. And it's especially fun to see how many of you raised your hands when asked if you would like to go into space. Saw a lot of hands there. Now, I understand that not everybody wants to go into space. Some people might think it's a little bit scary or too hard or too much work, or certainly you would have had to have started planning that career out when you were 3 years old or something like that. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not quite the case. I didn't have that set career path. As a matter of fact, when I was a little kid and I saw people flying in space, I thought for sure by the time I was an adult, everybody would be flying in space. We'd be able to buy a ticket just like we do flying on an airline. Maybe you can make that happen. To me, it's slowed down a little bit. I think we need to accelerate this back up and give more and more people the opportunity to fly in space. But as you can tell, we're talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Flying in space incorporates all of those disciplines, and it takes so many different areas of engineering and math and technology to safely put people into space and safely bring them back home. And then even while we're up there, a lot of you probably think we're just playing around all the time because those are the only pictures you see, right? You see pictures of astronauts playing around, floating in the spacecraft. Well, actually, we're working the whole time. As we're sitting here today in this auditorium, we have 6 people on the International Space Station, 200 miles over us. And they're flying around, and it takes them only 90 minutes to get all the way around the Earth. Half of that time is in the daylight, half of that's in the dark. And they're conducting experiments on the International Space Station where we have continuously had crews on board for more than the amount of time that most of you here have been alive. Over 16 years, we have had crews on board the International Space Station conducting these experiments and learning more all the time. We look out from the space station and see what we can learn in space. We look inside the space station and learn what we can about how the human body responds to being in space for long duration. We're going to need to know these things and how we can live and what kind of technology we need as we do push forward and go to Mars. So we're actually going to need you. We've been sending humans into space for over 50 years. And we've been doing it pretty much the same way. I think it's about time we get some new ideas. And I see a lot of folks in this audience that could be the ones to bring us those ideas. And let me tell you something about these ideas. We flew the space shuttle for over 30 years. That's a long time. That's like twice your lifetime, right? So over 30 years, we flew the space shuttle, but the first concept for it was considered absolutely crazy. We're going to take a spacecraft and we're going to reuse it, because before that, we just sent astronauts up on a little capsule on top of a rocket. We threw the rocket away, and then when the capsule came back, it parachuted down, landed in the water, and we put the capsule in a museum. But the whole idea for a space shuttle was it was going to be kind of like a rocket, kind of like a spacecraft, and kind of like an airplane. But the airplane didn't have engines to land. You had one shot at landing. So you launched like a rocket with solid rocket boosters on either side and rocket engines on the back. Flew in space like an orbiting laboratory. We deployed satellites. We repaired satellites. Out here in the museum, you can see the mock-ups of the Hubble Space Telescope and other satellites. We did lots of spacewalks going outside the spacecraft, and we built the International Space Station. That's just a glorious monument to what we can do when we work together, especially in these STEM fields, with all of our international partners. We did all of this with the space shuttle, and then as it came back to land, it was like a big glider. It looked like an airplane. It actually landed on a runway like an airplane. Then we refurbished it and flew it again. We did that for 135 missions. That concept of doing that was considered absolutely crazy in the 1970s. But we proved it out, and there we worked it, and we got the International Space Station out of it. So here we are today with the International Space Station, with astronauts Peggy Whitson and Shane Kimbrough, with our international partners from Russia and also France, on board conducting experiments and living day to day, every day. Just they're living in this microgravity of space and conducting experiments. But you know, they didn't get there by themselves. Just as you're going to see in the movie that in a little while, it's way more than the astronauts. We are the fortunate ones who get to fly in space. We're the ones that maybe you see the pictures of, and believe me, I do feel very, very lucky to have had an opportunity to fly in space 2 times, and also to help build the International Space Station. My most recent space shuttle mission, I installed a whole big room, Node 3, and a cupola, a big bay window on the International Space Station. But it takes so many different people to do that in all kinds of disciplines. So maybe if you don't want to fly in space, you can still come help us. Just like our engineers at NASA, that I'd like to introduce you to some of them. So starting off, we have with us today some of our women engineers that have helped us not only fly in space, but also to explore space, explore interplanetary systems and universes. Starting off, we have Sandra Kaufman. Sandra is the Earth Science Division Deputy Director at NASA headquarters, and she helps us study a very important planet to us, our own Earth.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you so much for having me here today. I was born in a very small country in Central America called Costa Rica. And my dream of becoming a NASA employee started when I was 7 years old, when Apollo went to the moon. So now you know how old I am. And not to bore you with the whole story of my life, it took many, many years and a lot of effort, but I stayed true to my dream. I wanted to work in space, things related to space. I never really wanted to be an astronaut like Kay, but I wanted to be involved in the space program. I went through high school and college, like most of the people who become engineers. When I started in college, I even had a counselor tell me that I couldn't study engineering because I was a woman. But even with all of that, I overcame all of those things, and I kept dreaming, continued my dream. I wanted to be an engineer. And so in order for me to be an engineer that I wanted, I had to come to the United States. And eventually I became a citizen, and eventually I graduated. I have a degree in electrical engineering, a degree in physics. And through my 26-year career at NASA, I have done a lot of wonderful things, worked with a lot of people. I have actually worked on a shuttle mission as an engineer, training astronauts. That was the Hubble for Servicing mission. Worked in many other missions. I have touched pretty much all of the areas of science that we do at NASA, astrophysics, heliophysics, earth science, and planetary. I worked on the last mission to Mars that we launched, the Maven mission, and that was a cool thing, knowing that a little piece of me and a little piece of my country, Costa Rica, is rotating and orbiting around Mars right now. And to the point where now I am the deputy director for the Earth Science Division at NASA headquarters, overseeing all of the satellites that we have orbiting around Earth. We have 19 satellites that are constantly observing Earth and trying to understand the Earth as a system, because it's all interconnected. And also, based on what we study, we try to understand the societal benefits that we can extract from all of our studies, and how we can help humanity as a whole. So thank you very much for having me here.
Well, thank you. We also have today Andrea Rosaghi, and she is with us as the Deputy Director of Astrophysics at NASA headquarters.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up here, and I discovered my love for math and science in D.C. public schools. I would come home and try to replicate the experiments we did in science class in my basement. I would look for household items and see what I could do at home. And along the way, I discovered power tools. And one of the luckiest things for me, when I look back, is that my father never once told me that girls don't play with power tools. I'm so glad he never said that to me. So I decided to pursue engineering. I got a bachelor's and a master's in mechanical engineering, and I started my career at NASA as an engineer, where I worked on systems that go into space and send data back down to Earth so that scientists here can help unlock the mysteries around us here on our home planet of Earth, in our neighborhood in the solar system, places like Mars and Saturn and Jupiter, and then the wonders of the universe. Today, as the Deputy Director of Astrophysics, I get to lead a team of scientists and engineers and all kinds of other professionals looking at what are perhaps the biggest questions humans have ever asked. When you look up into that familiar night sky and look at those stars and constellations, we look at the questions of, how did it all start? How did the universe start? How do things work out there? How is it changing? And the big question of, are we alone, or is there life elsewhere in the universe? Now, these kind of questions are big, and we're putting together the pieces of the puzzle, but there are a lot of empty spaces in this puzzle. This is a multi-generational endeavor, and we need you to start filling in more pieces of that puzzle. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you. And we also have with us April Erickson. April is the new business lead for Instrument Systems and Technology Division at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
Good morning. Come on now, I need a better shout out than that. Good morning. Yeah, you're gonna see a phenomenal film. Hi, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I actually grew up in the New York Housing Authority, Public Housing Authority, and so I had meager surroundings, and I tell that to people because even when you don't have, say, a lot of money, you can really apply yourself very well in school, and that's sort of the American way, right? Get a good education, work really hard, and you maybe get a good job like we have. I love my job at NASA. So I went from Brooklyn, New York to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was such a good student that I got a scholarship to go to a school in Weston, Massachusetts. And then it was a teacher there that inspired me to apply for a program at MIT. And so I did a summer program, got to get into a flight simulator, and I scored 3 points off of a pilot score. And I thought, wow, this is what I want to do. So I went to MIT. got my bachelor's in aeronautical astronautical engineering. I know that's a lot to say, but we call those people rocket scientists or aerospace engineers now. I went on and came on to come to school at Howard University, and I did my work in structural dynamics and control of large space structures like the International Space Station. And so that's really why I'm so interested in sort of human space flight. But then I came across this little place called Goddard, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, one day walking through the halls of Howard, and they offered me an opportunity to work as a summer intern, and I wowed them and offered me a job that summer. And so I became the first co-op student that was a PhD student. So I am Dr. E to my students. I've taught at some of the local universities, but I've also taught middle schoolers. I teach aerospace club, and I have a lot of fun doing and building instruments and developing new technology for our space program. So hopefully we'll get a chance to meet you guys again. I've met some of you this morning, but I hope you enjoy the film. I want to say one more thing. I met Katherine Johnson 20 years ago, and I've been talking about her for 20 years. Now everybody's talking about her, and I hope you guys will too.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for taking time from your jobs to come today and talk with the students. I'd like to bring up one more person here, but one more thing I forgot to tell you. This is kind of interesting. How many people have seen the International Space Station fly over? Only a couple people. Well, you have opportunities every now and then. It's flying around all the time, but it doesn't always come right over us right at the right time. The only times we can see it, because it's so high above us, about 200 miles up, is when it flies over just before sunrise. So it's dark here on the ground, but the sun's shining on it. Or if it happens to fly by just after sunset. Dark here on the ground, but the sun's still shining on it. Well, Wednesday at 8:15 p.m., there's going to be a visible pass for almost 6 minutes. So I encourage you to go on to the internet and look for how to sight the International Space Station and go out and watch it go over. So now I'd like to bring up Barb Gruber, our aerospace educator here at the museum.
So you guys, we'll do that way. You guys have met a lot of modern figures here. What I'd like to introduce you to is one of those hidden figures like what you will see in the movie. Her name is Margaret Hamilton. She was a computer scientist, and her team was in charge of programming and compiling the guidance computer for the Apollo 11. She got the term rope mother because of the way that they had to code the memory for the guidance mission. So raise your hand if you know what a bit is. I got a few, just a bit. It's either a 1 or a 0, right? So this is how we've programmed computers since the beginning, and it's still how we can program some computers. The memory of the Apollo guidance computer consisted of iron beads with wires or rope running through them. The signal for a 1 would be if the wire ran through the bead, and the signal for a 0 would be if the wire ran around the bead. So it's a binary 1 or a binary 0. Now raise your hand if you know what a byte is. Okay? For those who didn't raise your hand, a byte is 8 bits. So pull up your ropes. You will notice that you have beads in groups of 8. You have 8 red ones, 8 white ones, and 8 blue ones. So each of those represent a byte worth of information. Now NASA had 9 years to get to the moon and back. You guys have 5 minutes to code. What you're going to do, pull the wire out of the beads. All right, I need my codes up on the screen. My binary conversion chart, thank you. All right, so you are going to code your initials. You can start at either the red or the blue side. If you are programming a 0, your wire will skip the bead. If you are coding a 1, the wire will go through the bead. I'm assuming you have 3 initials. If you don't have 3 initials, you have to improvise. You can either run the wires through all the white ones if you don't have a middle initial. If you have more than 3 initials, you got to pick your favorites. Okay? So you guys have 5 minutes to run the wires through. You're just going to run it through. Everybody is going to skip their first bead because binary code, that 0 is the first one of every letter. So you guys have 5 minutes to code your initials. All right? And our guests are going to be out there. Oh, you're departing. Okay. It was very nice. Thank you. Okay. So go ahead and get started. If you guys want to help them, that would be great. I want to thank our special guests, General Daly, Secretary Betsy DeVos, Ivanka Trump, Astronaut Kay Hire, and our modern figures and NASA engineers. So let's give them a round of applause.